You knew. Before they did anything, before anyone else noticed, you knew, and you have spent years calling yourself paranoid for being right. There was a moment, maybe more than one, maybe so many you have stopped counting them, when you stood in a room with someone everyone else trusted, and something in your chest pulled away before your mind had finished forming a single thought. No evidence, no incident, nothing you could point to and say, here, this is why. Just a tightening, a coldness behind your ribs that arrived faster than language, and then the smile came back to your face, because that is what you have been trained to do, and you carried on the conversation while some older, quieter part of you stood very still and watched. You have told no one about this, or you have told someone and watched their face do that specific thing faces do when they think you are being dramatic. You have learned to soften it, to call it a feeling, an instinct, nothing serious, just me being sensitive again. And then, months later, sometimes years later, the truth surfaced. The affair, the theft, the cruelty that had been hiding behind good manners the entire time. And you remembered that night, that handshake, that laugh that did not reach the eyes, and something in you went very quiet because you already knew. You knew before the evidence existed, and nobody prepared you for how lonely that kind of knowing actually is. Here is the perspective most people will never offer you, because it does not flatter the version of intuition that gets sold in books with gold lettering on the cover. The standard advice tells you to simply trust yourself, always, without question, as though the body is some infallible oracle that never misfires. That is not honest, and it is not useful. And frankly, it can be dangerous advice for the very people most likely to need it. The truth is more demanding than that. Your perception is real. The signal you receive is not imaginary. But the interpretation of that signal, the leap from something is wrong here to this person is evil, is a separate event entirely. And conflating the two is exactly where the suffering tends to live. Carl Jung spent decades studying this precise gap, the space between perception and meaning. And what he found there was not mysticism. It was architecture, the architecture of a mind that registers far more than it consciously processes, and a body that often understands danger before the intellect has been given permission to catch up. This is where the actual science becomes important, because what you are describing is not supernatural. It has a name, and it has been studied with rigor. Researchers call it neuroception, a term coined to describe the nervous system's capacity to detect safety or threat in another person's voice, posture, and micro-expressions entirely outside of conscious awareness. Your autonomic nervous system is scanning constantly. The tone behind someone's words, the timing of their pause before they answer a question, the millisecond flicker across a face before the social mask resettles itself. All of it is being read by a part of you that does not wait for permission from your rational mind. Separate research on what scientists call thin slicing has shown that human beings can form remarkably accurate judgments about a stranger's character from observations lasting only a few seconds, sometimes more accurate than judgments formed after extended interaction, because the longer exposure gives the performer more time to construct the performance. Your gut did not malfunction. It did its job faster than your conscious mind could interfere with it. But there is a deeper layer to this, the one Jung cared about most, and it is the layer that turns this from a tidy piece of trivia into something genuinely useful. He believed the human face and voice carry what he called shadow leakage, the unconscious material a person has buried, has refused to look at, has spent a lifetime hiding even from themselves, does not stay perfectly contained. It seeps. It shows up in the half-second before the mask resettles, in the specific quality of warmth that feels rehearsed rather than felt, in the eyes that calculate while the mouth is still smiling. The people who notice this leakage most reliably tend to be the ones whose own nervous systems were trained early, often painfully, early to monitor a room for danger as a matter of survival. If you grew up reading a parent's mood before they entered a room, if you learned that your safety depended on detecting a shift in tone before it became a shift in behavior, your perceptual system did not stop working once you left that house. It became extraordinarily good at its job, and it is still on duty. Now let us name the 5 signs precisely, because vague mysticism helps no one, and you deserve language for what you have been carrying. The first sign is the body speaking before the mind has consented to listen. A sudden coldness in the chest, a tightening at the back of the neck, the stomach dropping in the middle of an ordinary, pleasant conversation for no reason you can immediately name. You override this. You tell yourself you are overreacting, that the person has been nothing but kind, that you have no right to feel what you are feeling about someone who has given you no concrete cause for alarm. This is the moment most empaths learn to distrust themselves the most deeply, because the gap between the somatic signal and the available evidence feels like proof that the signal was wrong. It was not wrong. It was early. The body, through the vagus nerve and the broader machine machinery of the threat detection system, built to fire before the cortex has finished its slower, more deliberate analysis. You're not crazy for feeling something before you can explain it. You are simply operating on a faster timeline than the explanation can keep up with. The second sign is the mismatch you cannot quite articulate. The sense that what someone is saying and what someone is doing belong to two different stories. Their words are generous. Their eyes are doing arithmetic. Their compliment lands a half-second too late, as though it had to be retrieved from somewhere rather than offered freely. You notice the apology that contains no actual remorse, delivered with the correct vocabulary and none of the correct weight behind it. This is the territory of micro-expressions, the fleeting and largely involuntary facial signals that researchers have documented appearing and vanishing in less time than it takes to blink. Signals most people never consciously register, but some people absorb without trying. You are not imagining the gap between the performance and the feeling underneath it. You are simply one of the rare people whose perceptual system refuses to let the performance go unnoticed. The third sign is the quiet, almost embarrassing fact that the people and creatures around you who cannot perform social politeness react before you do. The dog that will not approach a particular guest, no matter how friendly that guest's voice sounds. The toddler who goes silent and clings to a parent's leg around someone. Every adult in the room finds perfectly charming. You have likely dismissed this as coincidence more than once, because it is uncomfortable to admit that a creature with no capacity for social diplomacy might be reading a room more accurately than the adults inside it. Animals and very young children operate almost entirely on the same fast, pre-verbal threat detection system that produces your own bodily signals without the social training that teaches the rest of us to override it for the sake of politeness. When you notice that reaction in someone or something incapable of performing, it is worth taking seriously rather than explaining away. The fourth sign is the strange, exhausting compulsion to overperform normalcy around a specific person, the urge to fill silence, to laugh slightly too quickly at things that are not especially funny, to keep the conversational tone unnaturally smooth. This is what trauma researchers describe as a fawn response, a nervous system strategy built around appeasement rather than confrontation, activated when something in the environment registers as unsafe, but escape or conflict feels impossible or unwise. If you notice yourself working unusually hard to keep a particular interaction pleasant, performing comfort you do not actually feel, that effort itself is data. You do not perform safety around people who genuinely feel safe. The performance is the tell. The fifth sign arrives after the encounter is over, in the place your conscious mind has the least control over, your dreams, the recurring image of a closed door, the unsettling presence that appears in disguised form, never quite recognizable, but leaving the exact emotional residue. That person leaves on you in waking life. Jung considered dreams the unconscious mind's most honest language, precisely because the waking mind is so skilled at editing, softening, explaining away. What you cannot say to yourself directly during the day sometimes finds its way into image and symbol at night. If a particular person keeps appearing, however disguised, in dreams that leave you unsettled long after waking, your unconscious may be processing something your conscious mind has not yet been permitted to fully name. Now for the part almost no one tells you, the part that genuinely matters more than any list of signs ever could. This sensitivity has a cost, and the cost is rarely discussed honestly. People who carry this kind of perceptual sharpness often describe a specific, corrosive loneliness, the experience of seeing clearly and being disbelieved, of watching others extend trust to someone your body has already flagged, and having no language sturdy enough to explain why you are holding back. You learn to keep your perceptions to yourself, because sharing them too often gets you labeled difficult, dramatic, cold, suspicious of people who have done nothing wrong yet. You start to wonder whether the gift is actually a burden, wearing the costume of a gift. And in the most painful instances, you watch your warning go unheeded. Watch the harm arrive exactly as your body predicted it would, and carry the specific grief of having known and not been believed, sometimes not even by yourself. But there is a second, harder truth sitting underneath all of this, and Jung would not let you skip past it, so I will not either. Not every chilling sensation about another person is information about them. Sometimes it is information about you. He called this projection, the unconscious habit of placing your own unintegrated material, your own old wounds, your own disowned fears, onto the screen of someone else's face, then mistaking the reflection for the truth about them. If a person reminds you, even subtly, even at a level you cannot consciously name, of someone who once genuinely harmed you, your nervous system may fire the exact same alarm it fired in that original danger, regardless of whether this new person carries any actual resemblance to the threat beyond a tone of voice or a posture or a particular kind of confidence. This is not a flaw in you. It is simply why discernment matters as much as sensitivity does. The signal deserves your attention. It does not automatically deserve your verdict. The path forward is not to silence this perception. And it is not to obey it instantly and without question either. It is to develop what might be called a second listening, the practice of noticing the signal, naming it precisely to yourself without immediately converting it into a moral conclusion about another human being, and then quietly gathering more information before you decide what the signal means. When the chest tightens around someone, instead of leaping straight to this person is dangerous. Try asking yourself a slower, more honest question. What specifically did I just notice? A tone, a timing, a look, then ask a second question. Does this person resemble anyone who has hurt me before, even faintly, even in a way I would normally never connect on purpose? Sometimes the answer confirms what your body already suspected, and you act accordingly with appropriate caution, without needing anyone else's permission to protect yourself. Sometimes the answer reveals an old wound wearing someone else's face, and the appropriate response is not distance from the new person, but tenderness toward the old wound that mistook them for danger. This is the integration Jung pointed toward across his entire body of work, the place where sensitivity stops being a wound that isolates you and becomes instead a genuinely reliable instrument. Not infallible. Instruments rarely are, but calibrated, trustworthy in the way a skilled craftsman trusts a well-kept tool. Not because it is magic, but because they have learned its particular tendencies, its particular ways of misfiring, and they account for those tendencies before they act on what the tool tells them. You are not broken for noticing what others miss. You are not paranoid for trusting a body that has rarely been wrong about danger and only occasionally confused about its source. The work now is not to doubt yourself into silence, and it is not to weaponize every uneasy feeling into an accusation either. The work is to listen carefully, name precisely, and act with the kind of discernment that turns a heavy gift into a genuinely useful one. You were not given this sensitivity so you could spend your life afraid of people. You were given it so you could finally stop being afraid of yourself.